There is a version of childhood that looks completely fine from the outside. No abuse, no poverty, no single event anyone could point to and call a tragedy. Just a child who learned very early that their feelings were inconvenient. A child who discovered, long before they had words for it, that life at home seemed to move more smoothly when they did not need anything. So they learned to stay quiet, to adjust, to take up less space. And that child grows into an adult who cannot explain why they are always tired, why rest feels strangely unsafe, why being taken care of, even gently, even by someone who genuinely loves them, creates a discomfort they cannot fully put into words. Because this is not a story about something that happened, it is a story about something that never happened at all. And the grief for what never happened is real. It is simply much harder to see. In developmental psychology, there's a specific word for what happens in households like this. It is called parentification. Psychologist Gregory Jurkovic spent years studying this pattern and gave language to something many people had lived through without knowing its name. Parentification happens when the roles between parent and child begin to quietly reverse. The child gradually sacrifices their own developmental needs in order to take care of the emotional or practical needs of the parent. And this does not always look like neglect. It does not always look dramatic. Sometimes the parents are physically present every day. Sometimes everything appears normal from the outside. What is missing is something much quieter. The parent's ability to hold the child's emotions without needing the child to hold theirs. So the child becomes the one who watches, the one who notices, the one who reads the room before anyone else even walks into it, the one who understands at 7 or 8 years old exactly which tone of voice means something is wrong, and then changes themselves to keep everything stable. Researchers describe two forms of this. One is practical, a child managing responsibilities beyond what a child should manage, taking care of siblings, handling adult tasks, keeping things running. The other is emotional, and emotional parentification is often the quieter wound. The child becomes the listener, the comforter, the emotional container, the one who absorbs stress and finds ways to make it smaller. And a child cannot repeatedly do this without learning something deep beneath awareness. My needs come second. Not sometimes. Always. This does not look like trauma. This is where things become difficult, because most people imagine trauma as something obvious, a clear event, a moment that can be pointed to. Something happened, something was wrong, and the pain afterwards makes sense. But experiences like this rarely leave behind a single moment. They leave behind an atmosphere. Thousands of small experiences quietly repeating themselves. Psychologist Jonice Webb described something closely related and called it childhood emotional neglect. Her insight was simple and powerful. Some wounds are created not by what happened, but by what never happened. A parent who never asked how you felt and truly wanted the answer. A parent who met every practical need while leaving no emotional room for yours. An invisible absence, a quiet deficit, not something done to you, something missing from you. And because there's no dramatic event, many people spend years believing they have no reason to hurt. They search their childhood for evidence, for something obvious, for something severe enough. And when they do not find it, they often conclude, maybe I am just weak. Maybe I am the problem. Maybe I should not feel this way. And so the grief becomes buried beneath guilt. The body remembers. The body remembers these things, even when the mind cannot explain them. When a child grows up needing to monitor another person's emotional state constantly, the nervous system adapts. It learns vigilance. It learns anticipation. It learns that safety depends on paying attention. Some researchers describe this through what later trauma literature calls the fawn response. When fighting is impossible and leaving is impossible, the nervous system learns something else. Appease, adapt, become what is needed, prevent the danger before it arrives. For a child in this environment, this does not become a strategy. It becomes an identity, and years later, the pattern remains. The adult walks into a room and immediately senses the emotional atmosphere. They feel responsible for tension they did not create, responsible for moods they did not cause, responsible for problems they cannot solve. And rest itself begins to feel uncomfortable, because rest means attention turning inward. And in childhood, attention turned inward was often the least safe place to be. Most grief has edges. Someone dies, something ends. There is a before and an after. But this kind of grief does not look like that. There's no funeral for a childhood that never fully happened. No ritual for the version of yourself that should have existed but never had the chance. Researchers sometimes call this disenfranchised grief, a grief that is not openly recognized, a loss with no obvious shape, no socially accepted reason to mourn. And so people carrying it often struggle to explain what they are grieving at all. Not a person, not an event, an absence. The afternoons that should have been spent playing, the years that should have been spent discovering who they were, the experience of being the one allowed to need help. This grief often appears quietly, during therapy, in moments of stillness, in the strange ache that arrives when witnessing someone else's parent show up for them in a way yours never did. And often the feeling gets dismissed almost immediately. It was not that bad. Other people had it worse. I had food, I had a home, but this is not humility. It is the same mechanism repeating itself, the same habit of minimizing your own experience, the same lesson learned long ago. The effects often remain remarkably consistent. Many people with this history experience exhaustion that rest does not fix, because the nervous system never truly stops scanning, never truly stops preparing. Many also find themselves repeatedly drawn toward relationships where they become the caretaker. The role feels familiar. The nervous system recognizes it, because if connection once required usefulness, it can quietly begin to feel like usefulness is still the price of love. Many describe feeling loved only when they are needed, and anxious when nothing is being asked of them. Even receiving care can feel strangely uncomfortable, not because they do not want it, because they never learned how to trust it. What actually helps? The first step is not changing behavior. The first step is recognizing that something real happened, even if it looked invisible. Naming it matters. Naming parentification, naming emotional neglect, naming the patterns as adaptations rather than personality flaws, because naming something gives grief somewhere to land. Healing also tends to happen slowly, especially when it involves the nervous system. The lessons learned over an entire childhood rarely disappear quickly, but nervous systems can learn. They can slowly discover that safety does not require vigilance, that rest does not automatically mean danger, that being cared for does not always have to be earned, and with enough repetition, enough safety, enough moments of staying, something begins to soften. If you grew up this way, some quiet part of you may still be waiting for permission to grieve, waiting for someone to say that what happened counts, even if nothing dramatic happened, even if there was no obvious villain. You are allowed to grieve a childhood that looked fine and was not fine. You are allowed to mourn the version of yourself who never learned how to need something safely. You do not need a worse story for your pain to become legitimate. You only need the truth. The exhaustion you carry is not weakness. It is not a flaw in your character. It is the residue of a job you started far too early and were never meant to keep forever. And recognizing that is not self-pity. It is simply the first accurate map of what happened. Until the next one.